Hey everybody, I'm Andy Golub. I'm the Executive Director of Human Connection Arts. I'm sure you know that. Thank you for coming here today. We are a new nonprofit organization that is based very much on public body painting events, but more importantly, it's really based on finding a way to, bring people together in what seems to be an increasingly divisive environment, and to do it through art because, well, there's a few reasons. One, it's because like what I know about, and the other is because it's sort of something universal. It's something that is not divisive. That art has that ability to bring people together. And so while we're doing these events, we're also doing a series of discussion groups, which I think is really a great opportunity for people to sort of share ideas. The discussion groups are slightly different than maybe normal discussion groups you might know of. So basically, instead of it being where all the panelists speak for a long time and then people listen for a long time and then a couple of people ask questions, I encourage it to be much more interactive because basically it's all about just connecting with ideas. We don't have a specific agenda of where the conversation can go. It can go wherever it wants. Encourage people to sort of share their thoughts. You can make a statement and not ask a question, and that's cool. Obviously, the panelists are going to be doing most of the talking. And I can also say that what we have is on the table there is we have like a whole bunch of flyers of upcoming events, including Body Notes on June 9th and Body Notes Bash also on June 9th. And so I encourage people not to just participate in those things, but help spread the word because we can just make as big an impact as we possibly can. And I think that's it for me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm good. Go ahead.
So I'm the moderator, and I'm also the wife of Andy. I'm Carol Sumpkin, and we have a really cool panel and a really cool discussion ready for you guys, and hopefully a great conversation. And so we're going to just introduce the panelists. I'm going to start with a question for each of them, and then we're really going to open it up, So, our first panelist here is Ron Kuby, who's a distinguished civil rights defense attorney and also a member of our board at Human Connection Arts. And Ron has a lot of interesting cases and has definitely had his share of interaction with the police, as we can see here. And he is a passionate defender of artists, and some of you might know that he actually defended Andy and Spencer Tunick, and we're going to, I'm sure, hear a lot more about that. And you might have heard him on the radio, WABC with Curtis and Kuby, and Ron was a little more to the left, and I think Curtis a little more to the right, and it had a kind of a... And just from my personal experience with Ron was back in 2011 when I'm hanging out at night and I get this phone call from somebody on the street saying, Andy's been arrested, they're taking him away in handcuffs. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to use the phone number in my phone. And so I hit the speed dial, and I didn't quite get through on the first phone number, and then I called actually Spencer Tunick, who was in Mexico, and I'm like, Andy's been arrested, what do I do? Do you have another phone number? And he gave me another number, and he said, just say not guilty. Just tell him not guilty. And then when I got a hold of Ron said, not guilty. So we'll hear a little more about that story, but that was my first interaction with you.
Oh,
so
how
that
nice. So sweet.
And then with Matthew, you guys might be familiar with the amazing sticky note project that was in Union Square right after the election, and there was just a lot of need to people to express themselves, and it was just mind-blowing how it went incredibly viral for 5 weeks. And I know that our family, Forrest, Indigo, you were doing something else, you weren't around, but we went down, and it was the first time that we went into the subway without actually taking a ride. And we just went in and we're like, okay, I'm happy to give the MTA a little fee so that we can see an amazing art project and And it really was not the first time. You've been doing this subway therapy. We'll hear more about that. And it's just a really great way for people to be expressing themselves. And it's just astounding. And then, of course, we have the illustrious leader, Andy, who has invariably is always dealing with authorities and having conversations, but he knows he's got the law behind him. And one of the things that we always know whenever we do any event is, do you have the Xerox of the law? And we, so we have it with us, and it's written horribly. Like, in fact, the cops can't even understand the law. Like, it's got all these double negatives in it, but we are backed by it. And so it has enabled, really for there to be full nude body painting. And are you guys there?
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Okay, cool.
Over to the right.
So now I'm just going to start off, Ron, with you. I think it's really, you're unusual probably when you go to the website and you see his areas of practice. And, defense, whatever, one of them is public nudity. That's literally an area of practice. So why would you take that on? I mean, it's really unusual.
I got tired of murder and terrorism, and so I sort of wanted to branch out into something. It was never anything I planned on doing at any point. It was one day in 1995, I was down in the basement at 13 Gay Street, where the late William Kunstler maintained his residence and his office. And it was Sunday morning, and we were both working on something for the next day, and Bill comes down and says, in his deep voice, "Oh, Ron, you gotta see this, come on out." And out there in the street was a man, a woman, and a baby, fully nude, wrapped in plastic wrap, and this young guy named Spencer Tunick was taking a picture of them on Gay Street. So we started to talk to Spencer, thought it was all interesting. Kunstler, always being a guy who had a lot of foresight, made sure Spencer got our cards, thinking that this might prove to be a problem sometime. And indeed it did, in Spencer's various shoots, in which I assume you're familiar with his work, yes? Okay. Yeah. And this was in Rudy Giuliani's New York, and so they kept arresting his models. And I kept defending them and getting them out. And then finally they figured this out. They finally got their shit together one Sunday morning in the middle of Times Square, where he had about 300 people on the ground in the middle of the intersection, during the interregnum between the red and green lights, fully nude. The cops realized, wait a second, we'll arrest the photographer. See? And that way he doesn't get his shot. So there's a great picture of Spencer. The only three people wearing clothes are two cops and Spencer, the former leading the latter away. And at that point, it stopped being so much fun. And it turns out that in the great state of New York, there is no law prohibiting public nudity as long as it's done pursuant to a performance, play, exhibition, or show. And really, when isn't it? The only thing the law, at least in New York City, bars is simple nihilistic nudity. You wake up and say, "Fuck it, I don't want to wear clothes today," and walk out. That they can arrest you for. But if you're doing it with some sort of artistic or performance intent, however obscure the message may be, it's not against the law. We're not talking about First Amendment protection for public nudity that falls into other categories, or equal protection guarantees for bare-breasted women, which also fall into another legal category. It simply is not against the fucking law. Excuse me, young man. And so we went into federal court to get an injunction against the police arresting Spencer. And I'll finish the story, but what was weird was this must have been 1996 or something, and I have a video cassette. You all remember that, you don't, but it's got pictures on it in a plastic thing. Okay. To show the judge just how minimal the impact is on the city, when it's done at this time, because, people get their clothes off very quickly, they get into position, Spencer takes his picture, and usually within the span of the change of a traffic light. And so the courtroom was packed with people. coming to see this like 3-minute video. And these are lawyers and judges and people in the legal system. And it's like, good God, people, have you never seen bare boobs before? Is this like the first time? And we're playing the thing, and it's off in one corner. You can feel the whole court sort of starting to shift because everybody's trying to get a look. And there's something profoundly crazy going on here. And it's not me. For a change, it's not me. Anyway, we won the injunction. It went up to the multiple different courts through a very fun and incredibly boring legal process unless you happen to be a student of federal state court certification of legal questions. No, I see no videos. So that's how I got started, and subsequently represented a lot of other people, both in terms of public nudity. Holly Van Voos, the topless paparazzo. I don't know if you remember her, but she did a very bizarre and unsettling little gender bending photography thing that constantly got her arrested, including once in the subway, as I was telling Matthew. She was arrested under the hygiene law. And the judge looked at it and I said, yes, Judge, I guess there's no telling where they've been, Your Honor. Who's been touching them? Charges all dismissed. And then started, more recently to do other kinds of areas where art and the criminal justice system intersect. Represented Poster Boy in Brooklyn for his work, if you want to call it that. The state didn't. Represented a lot of graffiti artists throughout the 80s and the 90s, including some who have passed to the hereafter. And more recently, the Edward Snowden sculpture that was erected in Brooklyn, confiscated, and then we got it returned, that kind of stuff. So it's a lot of fun, and unlike most of my legal practice, nobody dies or goes to prison at the end, which is good. It makes me happy. Yeah, right?
Cool. Well, we're going to shift over to you, Matthew.
Okay.
So have the authorities ever approached you? Has it been ever an issue when you're doing your therapy?
Every once in a while, something will happen where I interact with police or authority from the MTA. So if any of you guys aren't super familiar with my work or what I do, over the last year and a little bit or so, I've been setting up a table and 2 chairs and doing some sort of project in the subway or in Union Square. Not on the subway, but on the platforms or in bypass tunnels or things like that. And it looks like this: just me, another chair, a sign, and then sometimes I'll put up some wall art. I dress up how I imagine a therapist looks.
Oh.
And then I think, I got a certificate of achievement from the dollar store, and every good therapist's office needs some wall art, so it just kind of evolved into this really funny thing. But every once in a while, I'll be out there for a couple hours, and then a police officer will come by, and almost always, police will walk by me on the platform and never give me a hard time. But sometimes they will, and I don't exactly know when or where that distinction is. I've looked a lot into where you're allowed to do busking, and I imagine that my project doesn't take up that much more space than busking. Playing guitar or painting in public or things like that. And so I've gotten kicked out of 8th Avenue, but not 14th Street, 6th Avenue on the L train. And the difference between the two, maybe I was on the more mezzanine area. If I'm on the platform, I never have a problem. But if I'm on the one level above that by where the turnstiles are, I'll get kicked out of there.
So, but it hasn't really stopped you from trying to continue your work or anything. And
No.
why is that? I mean, I can imagine it's stressful.
I suppose I feel like there's this period of time where I'm nervous that I'm going to get kicked out, and it's really only when I'm setting everything up, because I get wall hangers, like command hangers, and I'll set them up on the wall, and that's how I hang my wall art. And so while I'm doing that, I feel like someone might come up to me and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" I'd be like, "Oh, I'm setting up this thing." And they'd be like, "No, don't do that." But if it's set up, once I sit down and I'm in the office and I'm there, I'm kind of a fixture and more just part of the scenery, and so no one really gives me a hard time then.
New York absorbs you.
Yeah.
Just absorbs you.
So after I was doing this for 9 months and getting kicked out every once in a while, but not very often. I did the sticky note thing, and that was a whole different kind of a whole bunch of different kinds of problems came up from that. And I, from the back of house side of things, heard a lot from the MTA and from the police in Union Square. And it was a huge legal problem for them because it was this big example of freedom and expression in New York at that time. But people were worried that someone was going to slip on the sticky notes, and then whose responsibility is it? Is it mine? Is it the MTA's? Is it, you know? So there was a whole bunch of stuff like that that was really strange. And then I had a moment where I was, let's see, so I went out on Thursday the 8th. Let's see, was it Friday? Whatever the 9th was, the day after the election, I brought a bunch of writing materials into the subway, and then this happened. It was like this explosion, and I did it. I spent about 12 hours in the subway every day from the 9th until I think the 20th or so. But there was a Saturday that I went, or maybe it was Sunday. I think it was a Sunday that I went out right after the election, and we had 10,000 sticky notes spanning the entire tunnel on the connection between 14th Street, 6th Avenue on the L train and 14th Street, 7th Avenue on the 123. I don't know if any of you guys have walked down that tunnel. It's like this, people hate it. It's like this really creepy, long tunnel. It's like a gauntlet, and people hate it. And on that day, it had 10,000 sticky notes, sprawling out like ivy. And the police came down, and I went up to them immediately to figure out what was going on. And they said that someone had brought a sticky note with something offensive on it, something racially insensitive. So someone had brought that note to the booth, and the people at the booth didn't know that it was happening. And so they called the police saying that somebody was doing racially insensitive graffiti or something like that in the tunnel. And then they showed up. There was 4 or 5 officers that came down. And they, I think it was one of my favorite moments ever as a performer, artist, or just person that's in the public, because this guy, he looks, and he's like, "What is this?" He's like, "Why? What?" He's like, I can't look through all these." And it was hilarious. It was just a great moment. And I said, this isn't about being racially insensitive. You can look at them. The vast majority are positive, and they're about people connecting to each other in a very divided time. And it was so funny because there was a MTA official, and the cops were like, "Is this okay? Is this the MTA's official stance that this stays up?" And the guy's like, "Well, I don't know. I mean, my boss." And the guy's like, "Is it the MTA's official stance? Like, you need to tell me a yes or no right now." And the guy's like, "Well, my boss said that it needs to stay up." And the guy's like, "All right." And then I'm talking to the like police chief of that district or whatever it was at the time. And he looks at me and he's like, "Listen, if he would have said no, I'd be taking you to jail, because what you're doing falls into, graffiti or whatever,
Or whatever.
And he said, you're really lucky. Next time you have to ask for permission and get whatever permits you need or anything like that." I said, "Okay, I'm sorry." Thank you. Nothing happened. And then the governor did a sticky note and kind of gave immunity to the project further. So that was really
You got an
nice.
official pardon.
Yeah, I felt like that. You know? I feel like if I ever get in trouble for it, I can be like, hey, but you
That's great.
So I don't know. Yeah, those are the only interactions I've had with police that have been
Oh, that's
troublesome. But
relatively substantial. Well,
yeah,
I'm
nothing
going to
bad.
open it up to you guys in just a second. I'm just going to have Andy tell us what was happening here.
It's a great photo.
Yeah,
What is that?
It's
Like,
so,
you know
so
what's happening?
fantastic.
Well, you know, people, I guess people, sometimes they think because I'm dealing with police, every time I go out, there's basically a 50-50 chance that I'm gonna have to have conversations with police, that basically, it doesn't make me nervous, and it always sort of does. And, you know, on the same token, before, in 2011, when I was arrested, you know, before that happened, I lost my train of thought. But in any case, I've been, yeah, go ahead.
Do you know what
Which project that one
Yeah,
was?
which project was that?
I think that was when I was painting 10 nude models in Times Square, and that was shortly after the first body painting day.
And why did you get arrested?
Basically, what happened was in early on I was painting models in the streets. Before that, I was painting in the studio.
Right.
And then I was harassed by people in Times Square because Times Square became a pedestrian mall, and I saw it and I was like, this is where I want to paint.
Sure.
And I guess because it was new, the cops were really harassing me. I felt like I knew that I wasn't breaking any laws because they were talking with me so long. And then I left, and then afterwards I came home and I called Ron Kuby up because
Because
I
why
knew-
wouldn't you, right?
well, it was like, yeah, it's like that was my only call, and I really didn't expect you to call me back, just because of like the big small thing, and but then afterwards you did, and I was like, well, I guess this is the type of thing that you would respond to, and what Ron explained was that not only, well, Ron sent the letter to the city, and basically said that what I'm doing is completely legal. In fact, full nudity is legal, not just the toplessness.
Right.
And so then that sort of planted a seed in my mind. I kept painting with models wearing bottoms, but then gradually I was like, hey, you know, do you want to maybe do full nude? And then and then the girls, they'd be like, yeah, that's cool, I'll do that. And I'm like, okay, take your panties off. And then they'd be like, oh, I mean, next time I'll do that, you know. And then eventually two girls did.
Right.
And
Zoe West.
no, there was
No?
actually that was the second round.
Second
It was two girls. Anyway, she was the second round. So anyway, so all three of
And
us
that
got
went
arrested.
okay. The first time you did it, you didn't get busted.
No,
Once
the
it was-
first time I did full nude, we got arrested.
Oh, you were.
We were out there painting. We had like probably 150 people around us, right next to the police station there.
Right.
And for like 2 hours, and no one said a word. So I thought we were clear. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, I go to get a drink. I come back, and one of the models is getting handcuffed.
Naked.
Yeah, well, I think she put her clothes on at
Okay.
that point, but she was scared. And the other one ran away. Yeah, she was naked. The other one left. She ran away.
Oh, God.
And then they were like, I said to the cop, I said, this is legal. You can't do this. This is legal. And he says, well, why did the other girl run away? I said, maybe she's scared of cops, you know? And she came back and she was clothed. And then we just, excuse me. And then we stood around for half an hour. They arrested the three of us. We spent 25 hours in jail.
Wow.
It was like, in some ways it was kind of terrible. In other ways it was like a great sociological experiment.
Sure.
And I kind of felt like I was never really anxious because I knew I was in good hands, and I just never felt like this was going to really be a problem.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was a good experience, you know. And the second one was, what happened was, then Ron gets a call from someone in the city, even though like I didn't go to my court case to get it dismissed yet.
Mm-hmm.
Someone in the city legal says it's no problem. He can paint nude now. And I
Right.
was about to paint a girl, and I explained to her, it's like, I'm being told not to paint nude until things are settled. And so then I say, guess what? I'm told we can paint nude. So she's like, oh, great. So she takes all her clothes off, and then some other cop comes who I think, had a personal issue with it.
Oh.
And
Sergeant Randazzo or something of "There are children here" fame. And poor little Zoe West, who's 4'11", all covered in paint, is led away in handcuffs into a police van in which they'd thrown a tarp so the paint didn't get all over the place.
Oh my
and I'm not sure if we have that photo, but it looks like, what was the movie at Pandora? What was the planet there? You know, it looks like they arrested, yeah, the NYPD had raided it and is taking one away in
Oh my
handcuffs. It
gosh.
was, or Middle Earth, and you've arrested an elf. And we had specific permission for that from the city. They specifically guaranteed that was not going to happen. So we actually sued on that for Zoe just because it pissed me off. And they settled for $15,000. And the headline, "Just what a nude model needs, a nice suit." It's true.
So, any questions out there? I think we got a lot of.
Okay, so you mentioned when you were introducing yourself that there was a New York state law that protected this. But then you said that you then had to sue in federal court. Why would you sue in federal court if it was a state law? Why not a state court?
Because while the state law completely protected what Spencer Tunick was doing and ultimately what Andy is doing, the city refused to back down. They just kept arresting people. It didn't matter to them what the law said. So when you're faced with that kind of situation where the local police are going to be systematically violating the law, you get a federal court and you get an injunction, a federal injunction against their interference, which ultimately we did. It took a long time in a lot of courts, and we had our first totally legal full nude body shoot. I think it was under the Williamsburg Bridge in 1999, after the final federal court, including the United States Supreme Court, signed off on the thing. But, it was Rudy Giuliani days, and he just, he was enjoying fighting it. I mean, Rudy never cared what the law was. Civil liberties were just a commodity. You would violate them, one person on 100 would sue, you'd pay that person off, lather, rinse, repeat.
I have a question about neighboring states. You know, what is the legal situation, for example, in New Jersey?
I used to know the situation in New Jersey. In most states, outside of designated areas, full nudity, full public nudity is unlawful. The federal courts have never extended First Amendment protection to full nudity in public. And it's just sort of a little quirk of New York state law, which again is actually sort of written in the triple negative that allows this to happen. And it's really more a function of New York City itself, because New York City is such an art venue. If you think about it, if you try to write a law that prohibits expressive conduct or speech, you have to write it really carefully to not criminalize things you don't want to criminalize. So if you want to criminalize public nudity, that's fine, except what about all the film shoots that go on in New York? What about all the museums? What about all the exhibits? Are you really intending to sort of shut all of those down too? And if the answer is no, we just want to go after Andy's people, not against, the whatever, Golub, you really can't do that.
Yeah.
You really can't do that. And that's, we've been able to sort of play off the interstices of their indecision. Ooh, I like that. Sounds nice.
So my partner and I were at 2 of your body painting days, and the second one, there were tons of cops around, hanging the entire day with us. And, well, our first, your second. And escorting us when we did that little march. The third one, which was last year, there wasn't a single cop around. And what changed?
It definitely changed on their side, not my side. I mean, one of the things that I sort of like about the whole thing that we're doing is that it's sort of, we're just doing what we're doing, and then they have to figure it out, I think obviously I would guess that the thing that changed was the first year they were prepared for chaos to ensue. You know, they would think, people would think, because in fact, you know, everybody, you're just not used to seeing a naked person. If somebody were right now just gonna get naked, people would be like, oh my God, I can't do that. Like, it's a very strange thing how when you just simply don't see something around, that you have this impression that it'll cause chaos. And obviously, it did not only not cause chaos, but the cops that were standing there ended up being like a little photo booth, because all the models were like lining up and
They were doing
taking
selfies with the
they're doing
cops.
photos with them. But the cops at Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza were really, really sweet. You know, I mean, there was one guy who had like a scowl on his face, but for the most part, they were very positive and nice, and helped us kind of just make sure that we get through the traffic to the bus. And, you know, I think that, you know, I'd like to say that, you know, I mean, I think that generally people's, you know, view of the police is, you know, according to where you're at and things, very negative. And I think a lot of people, you know, have had rough experiences with the police, myself included. And I think it's important to kind of just see everybody as people, no matter what they are, and including profession. And I think that there was one time that was very memorable to me, was when I had I'm painting in Times Square, and here they come, and two cops are coming my way. And then one of them just stops and says, yeah, I went to art school. I think what you're doing is really cool. And the other person looked and was like, who are you? and if you can sort of get wedged between them, then I think you've really accomplished something, because I think that there's sort of an impression on their side of an us versus them kind of mentality. And I think that we should all work towards seeing people as people. And it's very, you know, it's difficult because you're constantly triggered by things that sort of kind of make people go to their sides.
And the first body painting day was in Columbus Circle, and there's actually this giant statue, and there's a nude, you know, and so the police were fine with it. It was the park security, and the woman comes up to me, and she is mad. She's mad that this is happening. What are all these nude people? And it's disgusting. And you've got, you know, kids and families and everything. And I'm like, well, what is the difference between these nude people and this? And I just point at this giant penis right next to me. And, you know, and it's just interesting how nudity, when it's actually real, like, you know, breathing, and then a sculpture, and, you know, the differences between that. But, you know, when you have the law behind you, it's just amazing how empowering that is. And I'm definitely not, I am so non-conflict oriented or, you know, anything, but, you know, I have my little Xerox, and I'm like, it's legal.
What is it? Off the top of your head, you guys don't know the law, do you? Do you know? The one that you're talking about, the one that the triple negative one that protects you guys? What's the, I'm like curious what it sounds like.
It says that it's not legal unless there are it's not legal unless these conditions are met, including the play.
It criminalizes nudity in a public place, except if it's done pursuant to a play, performance, exhibition, or show, except a city, town, village, or municipality may enact such regulation restricting nudity pursuant to plays, performances, exhibition, or
Which
shows.
means you could probably go to almost any suburb in New York State. It's New York State law. You could probably go to almost any suburb in New York State, get fully naked, and just dance around, and it's legal because there'll be a law the next day, but there's probably no law now.
Interesting.
Are you able to cite that law, actually?
You know, if somebody would give me an iPhone set up to Safari, I left mine in the car, I'll get you the section. You know, it's of course part of the penal code, I just don't remember what it is.
Yeah, you had a question?
Yeah, hi. Hey.
Hi, Marjorie.
Thank you all for bearing your souls artistically and legally. Marjorie, I'm also a body painter, and I've shown art all over the world, so I'm very familiar with plazas and codicils and all that, but I'm curious from the artist side, how does all these regulations and, you know, hold harmless affect your work now? And are you factoring that in mind with your creative process going forward? or are you going ahead with your ideas and bringing in the legalese with you? I'm just curious about that.
I mean, there was one time I was painting in Times Square, and it was a little bit of a scarier time. Like they had like, I guess it's like a little bit of a tactic. They'll have like 6 or 7 cops all come in at once, and then some of them are walking, some of them are riding bikes. It's just like, it's very scary. And then like when I started, I was like all chilled out, you know, and I was just like painting. But then after they left, I was like, I was fired up, and I was painting it kind of like it changed my approach. But as far as like the content, I mean, when I'm painting, for me, it's like I'm always just trying to take everything that's around me and let it flow through me. So I try not to really think of where it starts and where it ends. So I would think that more than anything, there's a part of me that wants to show by example to the public that if you follow your own inspiration, whatever it is, that it's all going to be okay, because we always feel that if we do something that's like a little outside the box, so I feel like if I do something that's way outside the box, I sort of kind of cast that, and then from there, I sort of don't care about the art that much. I mean, it's a weird thing to say. I just try my hardest, and I don't really think about like what it means or where it's going. And now that things have sort of, you know, like picked up, and we have made like a lot of impact and a lot of press, and people seem to kind of get it more and more when we do the big groups. Now I'm personally more interested in just sort of, that's why I like doing this, because I like the idea of really taking it to another place where we can actually articulate.
I'm just curious though, more on the social media side too, and the legalese with that, because, you know, I've had certain images where I would want to post, but since they're nude or semi-nude, you know, what are the legal issues with that now? Because that's a Wild West in terms of regulation.
I mean, as far as social media, like, I think personally, I mean, I'm not going to get into it too much, but I think personally, it's like there's something like seriously wrong about that basically we're censored in how we communicate with each other. Although I understand that it's a private company, but it's almost like if I'm like talking to someone on the telephone and I curse, that the idea that now I'm not allowed to talk on the phone for a while, like it's different than it used to be. So basically the way it is that if I'm gonna communicate with people, I need to use Facebook, so I have to censor. So we're living in this sort of a pretty, you know, strange, yes.
You know, Facebook, of course, as people know or should know, has the nipple bots out constantly. And it's an amazing thing. And Spencer Tunick got barred from Facebook. He had a 24-hour timeout, even though he had pixelated every nipple and every labial lip in this like photograph of like 60 people. The pixelations were so small that it didn't look like it was pixelated. And therefore, he was banned because they looked like nipples.
Yeah.
But it is a private company and they can do that.
Look, if you get, I was just talking with Ava yesterday, but she just got off of, she's back out of Facebook jail.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, I think the ultimate way in which it really impacts people is that if you, because I forget, because I'm so used to seeing nudity, that I forget that it's like I'm supposed to feel scared when I see a nipple. And so if you keep getting suspended, I mean, I just saw it the other day, and all of a sudden I saw a picture of a girl on my Facebook page, and her nipple was perfectly exposed, completely exposed, and I was like, oh my God, I better this is dangerous, you know. And I think that if, you know, they're sort of almost training you to think in that way, where you associate nudity with either fear or associate nudity with like criminality, even though it's just simply getting suspended on Facebook. We're sort of, I mean, for me personally, I mean, I'm dependent on Facebook, so I don't want to get suspended.
Mm-hmm.